Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. The program is Focal Point. The network is AFR Talk. Glad to have you with us on this Wednesday edition as we get you over the hump for your work week. Want to talk about this sequester business for a little bit. Before I jump into that, I want to talk with you about Ted Cruz. I didn't have an opportunity to do this on Monday, but there's been a lot of fascination with Marco Rubio. A lot of people thinking that Marco Rubio is the man. He's young, he's hip, he's Latino, he'll get the Hispanic vote. He's the man. And I want to suggest to you that Ted Cruz is the man. Marco Rubio is not the man. Ted Cruz is the man. Now, Ted Cruz is a Latino. He's a Hispanic. He's got the whole Marco Rubio thing going on. He is from the state of Texas, and he is an absolutely unapologetic conservative, socially as well as fiscally. Now, Marco Rubio, I believe, has already gone off the reservation on immigration. Now, I want to be clear. I got some email kind of criticizing me for being hard on Marco Rubio. Like, all I do is just kind of hose off these candidates, and we got to have somebody that we can support. I want to be very clear that what my intentions are here. This is a refining process. Between now and 2016, we are in a refining process to try to identify a candidate that can represent the conservative movement in 2016. Now, we didn't have a candidate like that in 2012, and that's why we lost. All of the post-game analysis indicated that the more conservative of the two parties, lost this last election in 2012 because the Republicans did not run a genuine conservative. And so many who call themselves Republicans simply stayed home. They weren't enthused. They weren't motivated to turn out and vote because the candidate they had to back just did not excite them. And we believe, you and I believe, share together this conviction that we're in pretty desperate shape right now as a people. We're like the nation was in Jeremiah's time, where we know we deserve to have God do to us something that would make the ears of everyone who hears it tingle. I mean, Chris Matthews talks about a tingle up the leg, and God says to Jeremiah, look, if I have to bring my wrath down on this nation, it's going to make the ears of everyone, including Chris Matthews, tingle, because it's going to be such a disaster. It's going to be so pronounced. It's going to be so severe. So we need to find the best guy that we can for 2016, and that's why I'm honest with you about guys like Marco Rubio and Rand Paul. I like both these guys a lot. I like them a lot. I've had Rand Paul on this program, and I like him a lot. I like a lot of what he stands for. I like a lot of what Marco Rubio stands for. But I've got issues with both of them, and I think I feel a responsibility to you as my listening audience to be as honest with you about those that would like to be the standard bearer in 2016 so we can make the most intelligent choice we possibly can. We don't have a candidate yet. I mean, that's what the next 4 years are about, in part, is trying to select somebody who can be the leader of the pack. And Marco Rubio's name is in that mix. Rand Paul has made it very, very clear that he's going to run in 2016. He's going to be in it to win it. He's not going to run some kind of stalking horse campaign or something like that. If he gets in, he wants to go the distance. So Rand Paul is dead serious about it. People have talked about Chris Christie in this deal. People have talked about Rick Perry, who's a guy that I really like a lot. Now, nobody's really been talking about Ted Cruz, and it's probably premature to talk about Ted Cruz in 2016. But here's the thing that I want to point out about Ted Cruz. All of the right people hate this guy. I think they say a man is known by the company he keeps. I would also say a corollary to that, a man is known by the enemies he makes. In other words, if you've got a guy that is ticking off all the right people, then maybe that's a guy you need to keep your eye on. I've got 2 or 3 stories here. The New York Times is out there, the Washington Post, they're out there saying wonderful things about Marco Rubio. Why? Because he has collapsed on immigration. He now supports amnesty. So everybody's saying wonderful things about Marco Rubio on the immigration issue because he's folded like a cheap Bedouin tent in a stiff desert breeze. Now, I'm not saying Marco Rubio is not a great guy on a whole range of other issues. He's strongly pro-life. I commend him for that. And there's a lot of other issues where I believe Marco Rubio is right on target. So this is not a universal critique of Marco Rubio. It's just on immigration, which has now become a front and center issue. I think he's on the wrong side of the ledger on this deal. But nobody, none of these people, none of the networks, none of the major mainstream media, the antique media like the Washington Post and New York Times, are saying great things about Ted Cruz. They're hammering this guy. They're drilling this guy. They're piling on this guy. You get if you had a media flag for unnecessary roughness for piling on, the guys that are jumping on Ted Cruz would get flagged for personal fouls, late hit, piling on, because that's what they're doing to Ted Cruz. And what does that tell you? What does it tell you when the New York Times and the Washington Post are going easy on Marco Rubio relatively? Now, they went after him on the water bottle gaffe, and that tells you that they're still afraid of him. That tells you something right there, that they spent so much time trying to neutralize Marco Rubio over getting a dry mouth in the middle of a talk. I had one of those last night myself. Didn't have a water bottle, so I just had to kind of tough it out. Usually doesn't happen to me. It did last night, so it can happen to anybody. Well, why are they making such a big deal out of that? Because Marco Rubio represents a threat to them, and they want to neutralize him. They want to kneecap him, and the media will use anything in their power, anything and everything in their power to take out a candidate. You know, I was with folks in Missouri last night, and we were talking about Todd Akin. And you saw what the media did to Todd Akin. I mean, it was a search and destroy mission. It was carpet bomb this guy. It was reduce this guy to rubble, to reduce him to nothing more than protons and neutrons and electrons floating aimlessly in space. They wanted to vaporize the guy, and they did. And they did it with the help of Republicans, by the way, which is a big problem for me. But back to Ted Cruz here. So the media, I mean, the media is always going to tell us who the people are that we need to, that are the people that are a threat to them, because they're the ones they try to neutralize, the ones that they attack. And they have gone hammer and tongs after Ted Cruz. Here's an excerpt from the New York Times. I got a piece here by Frank Bruni in the New York Times. The head of the piece is the GOP's nasty newcomer. That's the description of Ted Cruz. He is a nasty newcomer. It's right in the headlines. Big, bold face. He's nasty. When a Vesuvius, and they say that even John McCain's got a problem with this guy, which is another thing that tells me, hey, this Cruz may be the guy. Here's the way the New York Times piece starts. When a Vesuvius like John McCain tells you that you belch too much smoke and spew too much fire, you know you've got a problem. And Ted Cruz has a problem. Listen to this description. He's an ornery, swaggering piece of work. He's already known for his naysaying, his nitpicking, and his itch to upbraid lawmakers who are vastly senior to him, who have sacrificed more than he has and who deserve a measure of respect or at least of courtesy. Courtesy isn't Cruz's métier. Grandstanding and browbeating are. Refers to his nefarious and hectoring insinuations about Chuck Hagel. He is intransigent is the other word. There's meanness, showy eruptions. He's rigid. He's polarizing. All of his fellow students at Harvard mention how fiercely smart he is, but the flattery stops there. They remember him as arrogant, sour, and self-serving. When he speaks in the confirmation hearing, he took a surprisingly audaciously contemptuous tone. He smirked dismissively as he griped. He has an affinity for opposing, a yen for obstructing. And while newly minted senators often keep a relatively low profile, he reportedly holds forth in Senate conferences at great and off-putting length. With his votes and his vitriol, Cruz undermines that. He brings himself plenty of attention. He'll bring Republicans nothing but grief. To which I say, Ted Cruz is the man. Remember there was that one scene in Die Hard where where John McClane's wife, Bruce Willis's wife, says, I know that my husband is doing that because all this bad stuff is happening to the bad guys. And she says, look, I know that that's John McClane. I know that that's my husband doing that because he's the only one on planet Earth that could drive people that crazy. So you look at this. I mean, you got a guy that can drive the New York Times right out of their minds. Then you know you've got a winner on your hands, and Ted Cruz is that guy. So I'm here to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the guy to watch is Ted Cruz. You can get John McCain and the New York Times and the Washington Post, all of them, to hate your guts. You know you've got a winner on your hands. Here's a piece from redstate.com. If a man is judged by the quality of his enemies, Ted Cruz should be a national hero. Over the past few days, the New York Times and Politico, I didn't even mention Politico, have run stories describing Cruz's first 6 weeks in office as combative and McCarthyite, McCarthy-like by his enemies. Now, you pull out Joe McCarthy and say, look, this guy's like Joe McCarthy, and you really pulling out the heavy artillery. You really want to take this guy out. Here's the stuff from the New York Times. Here's another article from the New York Times. Without naming names, Senator Barbara Boxer, Democrat of California, offered a biting label for the Texans' accusatory crusade McCarthyism. So they've got him pegged as Joe McCarthy, the guy that fought the infiltration of communism back in the 50s. Here's Politico. Behind closed doors, some Republican senators report that Cruz, in his stone-cold, serious prosecutorial style, speaks at length when it's far more common for freshmen to wait before asserting themselves. So he's just an uppity Hispanic to them. He's an uppity Latino. He doesn't know his place. He doesn't understand that freshman senators are supposed to be seen and not heard, and supposed to wait their turn. And Ted Cruz said, I'm not waiting for anybody. My constituents sent me here to do a job. They sent me here to stand for certain principles, and I'm going to do it, and I do not care whose feathers I ruffle, even if they're the feathers of John McCain. So we're no longer bringing a Lamar Alexander or a Chuck Schumer to the fight. We are bringing a Ted Cruz, and that is great news for the conservative movement. Focal Point AFR Talk.